So I've been building a chart to show us who owns most of the American stock market, all using public data. And I have no idea why no one's done this before. I got the first 100 companies in the S&P 500 in, and oh my goodness, check out what it shows. So I could be wrong about my analysis of this data. I would love your help making sure this is right. But this is showing me that Vanguard is the top shareholder of 98% of the 100 biggest companies in America. And BlackRock is the top shareholder of 94% of the 100 biggest companies in America. In total, together, they control more than 30% of the value of the top 100 companies in America. That's like a third of the market. This is not the whole S&P 500 yet. It's only the 100 biggest companies. But let me break down how I got this data. If you've been following along, you know that I learned how to scrape data from the web. And I built a chart for the whole S&P 500, starting at number 1, Apple, then number 2, Microsoft, where I'm live importing data. This is from simplywallstreet.com of the top 25 holders of every company, the number of shares they hold, their position values, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll zoom in a little bit. It turns out I had to scrape 2 different types of data because Simply Wall Street was importing prices with letters in the font. So it's like 23B for billion or 21M for million or whatever, which cannot do calculations in Google Sheets. So I added another column where I'm scraping data from Google Finance that is just the share price. And then I'm multiplying their share price by the number of shares they held to get their position value in this calculated column on the end. Rolling down to Exxon, number 10, and number 11 down here is Johnson & Johnson. You can see that when I'm scraping the data into this sheet, the S&P 500 sheet, I had to stack all the companies on top of each other, but you can't make a pivot table out of this because it's got these other rows in here that get in the way. So then I took all that data and copied it into a master sheet where everything is stacked nice and clean right on top of each other. So we've got NVIDIA goes straight into Google, straight into the next companies, et cetera. So this is all 100 companies of the S&P 500 in order with their prices and their position values. Their prices are scraping from yesterday's previous close. So it's not updating every moment. That would be probably way too much to handle. So then we take this data and we make it into a pivot table to aggregate all that information and organize it. And when we do that, we get to here. And I did some color coding to make it easier to see. And now I need to explain to you what this point system is because it's critical to what we're seeing here. See, when you own shares of a company, like Clorox, for example, you get voting rights with those shares. And whoever has the most shares has the most voting right. And those voting rights allow shareholders to vote on shareholder proposals that are up for vote at annual meetings and such. This is an example from General Mills in 2022. And it's things like how much you pay CEOs and what the direction of the company is. Voting rights also determine the board of directors who control the company. You know, some pretty important stuff. So anyways, I wanted a way to quantify how many times someone was the top shareholder because it won't be so straightforward as to say like how much money do they have invested because in a company like Procter & Gamble, you know, $100 million might not go as far as if you had $100 million in a smaller company. And $100 million in Apple is like not even 1/2 of a percentage point. So it's relative. And the more times you are the top shareholder, the more power you have across the market. And you can't quite see that if you're just looking at the dollar value of someone's positions. So here's the solution I came up with. I made a point system that's just arbitrary. Since I have 25 people per company as the top holders, I gave a total of up to 25 points per position in this order. So if you're the top holder, you get 25 points. If you're the smallest holder, you get 1 point. And you can see how it's 25 all the way down to 1. And then when I get to the next company here in my list, Microsoft, top holder gets 25 points again, down to 1 point. So every company, all 25 holders are earning points based upon their position value. So it's not hard to do the math. If there's 100 companies on my list so far, and you can have 25 points if you're the top holder, then in total, top holder of every company, if you had that, you'd have 2,500 points. However, there's way more than that available because it's not just the top holder that's getting points. All these guys get points. So when my pivot table added up all the available points, it turns out we have 32,500 points, which I presume is 25 factorial if you know math. And this is where we get the spicy spice. Vanguard has 2,463 points out of a possible 2,500. Holy shit. BlackRock 2,353 out of a total possible 2,500. Remember, this is something you wouldn't really see just from knowing the position values, but we already know, because we've been analyzing these companies, that Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street are the tops of all the lists. And I have so many of these collages, like hospice, funerals, and cemeteries. Come on, dude. I won't belabor the point, but it's different when you can see, oh yeah, they're at the top of that list, and yeah, they're at the top of that list. But this point system makes it plain and clear that actually Vanguard is at the top of 98% of those lists. Like, right? Am I getting that wrong? Let me show you how I calculated this. So the sum of their points is pretty obvious. The number of positions they hold is pretty obvious. It's just a count function. Sum of position value is obvious. It's just all the dollar value of everything they got, but it's hard to read these. So I divided it by 1 billion. So you can see the cursor's in the way of a comma. So that's 2,000 billion, which is equal to $2.277 trillion is Vanguard's total position so far in these top 100 companies. Here you can see my formula for divided by 1 billion. So here's where I need your help. Double check me. Share of total possible points. What I'm doing is I'm taking the sum of their points and I'm dividing it by 2,500, which is if they had everything, they'd have 2,500 points. So 2,463 divided by 2,500 equals 98.52%. Like, am I stupid? Because that math seems to check out to me. But that's really just telling us how many companies are they at the top of. What if we had out of the total number of possible points? So like, what's their overall share of point value in the market? For that, we would take their sum of their points, you can see, divided by 32,500, which if you remember is the total possible of all points added up. So that comes out to 7.58% share of the total top holdings in the market. Oh, and then one more over here. Figure, let's look at straight up dollar value. So for percent of the S&P 500 by dollar value, we've taken their total position value and divided it by this big ass number, which is the sum of this whole column, meaning their amount of money divided by all the money in all the 100 companies I've got in here so far. So of the top 100 companies on the S&P 500, Vanguard has 17.68% of that capital and BlackRock has 14.81% of that capital. Added up together, they represent more than 30% of the capital in the top 100 companies. Like, is that math wrong? And you can see how saying they own 30% of the capital is like, holy shit, that's a big deal. But when we're talking about share voting rights, knowing that they are at the top of more than 90% of these lists is a big deal. I mean, I know I built this table out of publicly available information, but I can't help but feel like they don't want you to know this statistic. Like, why has no one ever analyzed the top shareholders of companies like this before? This is pretty obvious and easy. And someone tell me I'm wrong, because I feel like this number, the percentage of their total possible points, is a pretty important thing to understand. And that's not to mention that over here in this column, it goes way down in this photo, you can't see it. We have all of the different firms and private equity and investors that are on these sheets all aggregated. So we can start to keep tabs on these motherfuckers. So I've been staying up late in the nights to build this chart out. It's definitely going smoother now, but stay tuned. We're going to build it bigger. If you all got suggestions about what I should do with it, I'm going to visualize it. We're going to make graphs. Don't worry. I'm going to learn how to use that cool visualization software y'all are talking about that I forget its name. Throw some suggestions down in the comments about what I should do with this. I'm glad you all stuck around for that. Later, nerds.